There are believers who pray every day and still live defeated. They sing, they fast, they attend church, they raise their hands, but inside they are losing a war that no one sees. It is not a war against the devil outside, nor against people, nor against circumstances. It is a silent, constant and exhausting war, the war for the mind, because the enemy does not need to destroy your life if he can direct your thoughts. An idea planted at the right time is enough to twist an entire destiny. And the most disturbing thing is this: many of the spiritual battles that you attribute to external attacks are actually thoughts that you have allowed to dwell within you for too long. Scripture does not say, have the faith of Christ, nor the strength of Christ, nor even the miracles of Christ. It says something deeper and more dangerous. Let the mind of Christ be in you. That means that following Jesus does not begin in the hands or in the behavior. It begins in the way of thinking. Because two people can live the same trial, and one draws closer to God while the other turns away forever. The event is the same. The mind is different. Stay until the end, because there is a spiritual principle that is almost never preached, and that determines whether a believer matures or remains stagnant for years. And when you understand it, you will discover why certain cycles have been repeated that you thought were tests, but in reality, they were patterns. If you do not rule your mind will become your Pharaoh. And there are thoughts that do not seem like a sin until they enslave the soul. Most people believe that spiritual life is about behaving well, avoiding mistakes, and doing religious activities. But the gospel never began in actions. It always started in the mind. Before there is a drop in behavior, there is first an internal conversation that no one hears. Before someone abandons their purpose, they first accepted an idea that seemed harmless. The mind is the secret room where the future is decided. And many believers try to change their behavior without realizing that they continue to think the same as when they lived far from God. That's why there are people who left old habits but still feel empty. They changed practices but not mentality. And the mentality always ends up rebuilding what you tried to abandon. Because behavior is a fruit, but thought is the root. You can cut a rotten fruit 1,000 times, but if the root remains diseased, it will grow again. Paul understood this better than anyone. He used to be called Saul, and he was convinced that he was doing the right thing while persecuting believers. His problem wasn't a lack of passion, it was a completely wrong way of thinking. The day he encountered Christ not only changed his direction, he changed his interpretation of reality. The same scriptures that he used to destroy, he now understood to give life. The same intense character now built churches. The same man, but with a different mind. Therein lies the mystery. God not only saves your soul, he also confronts the way you process everything. And when the mind does not give up, spiritual life becomes a religious performance, because you can talk about faith, while inside you continue reasoning as if God did not exist. And that incoherence wears down the heart until it slowly extinguishes the inner voice that used to burn. There is a reason why, even after a real encounter with God, many people return to old chains. They do not return because they want to sin. They return because they continue to interpret life with the old mentality. Deliverance occurred in the spirit, but the mind continues to live in Egypt, and a slave mind will always try to return to the place it knows, even if that place destroys it. Moses led the people out of slavery in one night, but it took him years to remove slavery from the minds of the people. Every miracle was responded to with complaints, every provision with fear, every promise with nostalgia for the past. They didn't miss the whips, they missed the safety of the predictable. Because the natural mind prefers a known slavery rather than a freedom that demands faith. The desert was not just a geographical place, it was a mental process. unlearning the logic of Egypt in order to live under the logic of God. And here is the daily battle. Your mind will always try to translate the spiritual into human terms. If God delays, you will think abandonment. If He corrects, you will think rejection. If He is silent, you will think absence. But thinking like Christ implies another interpretation. Delay is not forgetfulness. Discipline is not rejection. Silence is not distance. Many pray for external changes, but God first allows internal processes. Because if your reality changes without your mind changing, you will end up destroying what you prayed for. The problem is not that God is slow to respond. It is that He must first teach you to perceive the answer when it comes, and that teaching occurs in the invisible terrain where eternal decisions are formed. That is why Scripture insists on something that sounds violent, taking every thought captive. It doesn't say talking to it, nor analyzing it for hours, nor living with it until you understand it. It says capturing it. Because there are ideas that, if they sit in your mind long enough, will begin to speak with your voice. And when someone else's thought begins to sound like their own, the person believes that it is their personality, when in reality, it is an influence that they never filtered. We live in a time where the mind is permanently exposed. Conversations, networks, opinions, entertainment, news, everything competes to program the way you interpret life. You don't need to sin to defile yourself. It is enough to consume without discerning. Each content leaves a seed, and over time those seeds build perceptions. Then the person says, "That's how I am," without noticing that their way of thinking was slowly shaped by what they allowed in. Daniel lived in Babylon surrounded by a culture designed to redefine his identity. They changed his name, his education, his environment, his diet, his language, everything aimed to alter his mind. But he understood something profound. Before kneeling before an idol, someone first accepts an idea. That is why his first resistance was not public. It was internal. He decided not to defile himself in secret, and that silent decision sustained his faith when the pressure was visible. True spiritual character is not demonstrated when everyone is watching, but when no one is listening to what you think. Because there it is decided who your heart really belongs to, in that inner dialogue where only God is a witness and where the war is often lost before the day begins. Every morning you wake up in the middle of invisible programming. Before you talk to anyone, before you even remember your responsibilities, there are already thoughts waiting for you. Some bring anxiety, others comparisons, others memories that try to define who you are today by what happened yesterday. And if you are not aware, you will start the day reacting instead of governing. Many believers pray for peace while allowing their first inner voice to be fear. Thinking like Christ does not mean denying reality. It means interpreting it from eternal truth and not from momentary emotion. Jesus saw storms, but spoke rest. He saw scarcity, but declared provision. He saw death, but he announced life, not because he was ignorant of the circumstances, but because his mind was not subject to them. Its interior did not react to the environment. The environment reacted to its interior. Here begins the most ignored spiritual discipline, deliberately choosing which thought deserves to stay. Not everything that appears in your mind comes from you, and not everything you feel deserves to become a belief. There are ideas that must be rejected before they take root, because a repeated emotion becomes a conviction, and a conviction ends up directing decisions. That is why many life cycles, it is not the same problem, it's the same thought with a different scenario. They change jobs, relationships, churches, cities, but the experience repeats itself. They are not walking in geographical circles, they are walking in mental circles. And as long as the internal interpretation does not change, the external story will continue to be written with the same invisible ink that the soul learned to accept without questioning. This is where faith stops being a feeling and becomes training. Because renewing the mind does not happen through occasional inspiration, it happens through deliberate repetition. The apostle did not say, "Think differently when you feel strong." He said, "Be renewed." That implies a continuous, almost artisanal process where every day an old idea is replaced by an eternal truth. And at first it feels unnatural, even uncomfortable, because your mind has spent years learning to react differently. Joshua put it with radical clarity: choose today whom you will serve. He wasn't just talking about visible idols, he was talking about internal government. Every thought you accept establishes momentary lordship. If you accept constant guilt, guilt rules. If you accept anticipatory fear, fear directs your decisions. The mind is always under authority. The only question is which one. That is why the transformation does not begin when everything improves. It begins when you decide to think differently, even before seeing results. It is declaring hope when the evidence screams otherwise. It is forgiving when emotion demands revenge. It is staying when logic advises fleeing. It is not denial, it is spiritual government over interpretation. At first, it seems like an exhausting struggle, because you are breaking old mental agreements. But there comes a point where the new way of thinking stops being an effort and becomes nature. And at that moment, something strange happens. The same situations that previously shook you now fail to penetrate your peace, as if you had closed a door that had been open for years without you noticing. But there is an obstacle that few recognize. You cannot think like Christ while mentally feeding yourself like the world. The mind works just like the body. It always becomes that which you consume frequently. Many pray for purity while their imagination is trained daily with chaos, violence, mockery, comparison, and disordered desire. Then they wonder why prayer feels heavy. It's not a lack of faith, it's internal saturation. The soul does not distinguish between entertainment and teaching. He interprets everything as training. Every story you watch, every conversation you hear repeatedly, every word you accept without a filter builds invisible frameworks from which you interpret life. Then you try to read the Bible, but your mind translates the eternal with categories borrowed from everyday noise. It is not conscious rebellion, it is constant interference. That is why Scripture speaks of guarding the heart. Saving is not isolating yourself from the world. It is establishing filters. There are seasons when the believer must fast not only food, but information. Reduce voices to recognize the voice again. Because when too many ideas dwell within you, the truth stops confronting and only competes. Many hope to feel a desire for God to get closer, but the order is reversed. First you set aside space, and then the spiritual hunger returns. The mind becomes clear when it stops receiving everything indiscriminately. And in that uncomfortable silence, thoughts begin to emerge that you thought were your own. But in reality, they were accumulated echoes that occupied the place where peace should live. When the noise subsides, something happens that scares many believers. They begin to notice how many thoughts do not come from their true identity. Ideas of rejection appear without reason, fears without a present event, guilt without current sin. For years they thought they were part of their personality, but in reality they were internal agreements that they never confronted. And the dangerous thing about a mental agreement is that it doesn't need to be true to govern. It just needs to be repeated. Here comes the spiritual practice that almost no one teaches, responding to the mind with spoken truth. It is not enough to think about verses occasionally. The mind needs to hear the truth, to dislodge the lie. Jesus in the desert did not argue with temptation or analyze it psychologically. He responded with a spiritual statement, not because Satan needed to hear it, but because the human mind needs to affirm the correct reality to stay in alignment. Declaring is not magic or emotional denial. It is establishing authority over interpretation. When you say God is still good, you are not ignoring the pain, you are defining what meaning that pain will have within you. Because all suffering seeks to explain itself, and the explanation you accept will determine whether it brings you closer to God or slowly makes you cold. Many abandon the faith not because of what they experienced, but because of the internal story they built on what they experienced. That's why two people go through the same wound, and one matures while the other hardens. The event didn't change. It changed the inner narrative that was allowed to remain until character was formed. We then arrive at an uncomfortable truth. The mind is not transformed just by understanding, it is transformed by obeying. There are thoughts that will not disappear with explanation, but with decisions. Forgiveness, for example, is not born when the emotion calms down. It is born when you choose to let go even while the emotion continues screaming for justice. And in that act, something deep is rearranged within you, because thinking like Christ is not adopting beautiful ideas. It is reacting differently to what your nature has learned for years. Christ on the cross did not feel comfort. He felt real pain. But his interpretation was different. Where the flesh saw abandonment, he spoke purpose. Father, forgive them. That phrase did not come from a soft emotion, it came from a mind trained in the love of the Father. There is the model. The renewed mind does not wait to feel to act. You act to align what you feel. That is why mental renewal is daily. There is no single sentence that completes it. Each day decides which version of you will rule, the one who learned to always defend yourself, or the one who learned to trust even when hurt. And that choice happens in small moments. A comment you decide not to return, a concern you decide to deliver, a comparison you decide to cut off before it grows. Over time, you discover something surprising. Peace does not come when everything is resolved. It comes when your mind stops demanding control to feel safe. And that moment marks the beginning of a freedom that does not depend on circumstances, but on a presence that begins to occupy the spaces where the interpretations that stole your rest previously lived. Now you understand why many believers live spiritually tired. It's not just the external test, it's the internal resistance. They try to walk with God while holding thoughts that contradict everything He promises. It's like rowing in the opposite direction within the same heart. They pray for direction, but inside their mind they have already dictated an ending. They ask for peace, but they constantly feed disaster scenarios, and the mind, by repeating them, begins to feel them real, even though they have never happened. Here comes the most challenging practice, immediately replacing the incorrect thought before it takes hold. Not hours later, not when it has already caused anguish. The moment it arrives. Because thoughts have stages: suggestion, contemplation, belief. Most fight in the third, when it already hurts. Spiritual maturity learns to respond first, when it is still a seed. This does not mean living denying emotions. It means not allowing them to write doctrine inside you. You can feel fear without turning it into conviction. You can feel sadness without defining your identity by it. Jesus in Gethsemane felt anguish, but he did not allow that anguish to decide his obedience. The mind of Christ does not eliminate the struggle. It eliminates the dominance of the struggle, and when you practice this for days, something starts to change. Your first reaction stops being the learned impulse and starts being the remembered truth. Not because you are stronger, but because the repeated truth creates new paths within you, until one day you respond correctly without realizing it. And you notice that what previously controlled you no longer has enough voice to direct your steps. At this point, the transformation stops feeling like a discipline and begins to feel like an identity. You are no longer struggling to think differently. You start to realize that certain ideas just don't fit you. What used to captivate you now seems strange to you, like old clothes that still exist, but no longer belong to you. And there you discover something profound. The renewed mind not only rejects evil, it loses the taste for it. But this stage brings a silent temptation: return to autopilot. When peace becomes normal, the heart forgets that it was trained to get there. You stop monitoring what comes in, you relax the filters, and little by little old thoughts try to regain territory. They do not return as before, they return disguised as logical reasoning, prudence, and maturity. And without realizing it, the mind returns to negotiating what it once decided to deliver. That is why Scripture insists on remaining. Mental renewal is not an achievement that you keep. It is a relationship that you maintain. Every day you decide who will interpret your story, your past experience, or the present voice of God. Because the mind will always seek security in the known, but the spirit learns to rest in the eternal. Many fail here. They believe that victory is not having incorrect thoughts, when the true victory is not giving them a throne. They may appear, but they no longer rule. They may suggest, but they do not direct. And in that moment, you discover that spiritual freedom is not the absence of battle. It is the presence of an internal authority that now responds before fear. Thinking like Christ doesn't start by trying to think holy thoughts. It starts by deciding who has the right to stay in your mind. The mind will always be full of something. The question is not if you will think, but who will think of you. For years, many believers asked God to change their circumstances while He waited for permission to change His interpretation. Because the most constant miracle is not the external provision. It is the new internal perception. Here is born a radical practice. Consecrate the mind each day before living the day. Before the telephone, before the news, before opinions, you establish spiritual government. You name Christ as the authority on what you will agree to believe. You memorize His word not to recite it in public, but to use it at the exact moment when an idea wants to occupy the wrong throne. And little by little, something irreversible happens. You no longer react and then regret it. Now you perceive and then act. That's why this message doesn't end in inspiration, it ends in decision. If this moment confronts you, make it conscious. Commit to filtering what you consume, to speak truth into your mind, to interrupt thoughts that do not come from God. And if this message ignited something inside you, share it. Maybe someone continues to believe that their fight is against life, when in reality it is against the interpretation they have learned to accept. Because the day the mind learns to kneel, the soul stops crawling.